intro there, I just came back from spending 2 weeks in Vietnam, and a lot of this trip I did spend thinking about light. And that was partly because I didn't get a lot of it, especially at the start of the trip. The sun just wasn't peeping through at all. Thankfully, the sun did come out a little bit more towards the end of the trip, and I was able to shoot in conditions that I really like to shoot in, and more specifically, the type of light that I really like to shoot in for my photography. This might vary a little bit to you, but some important takeaways regardless, things I wish I thought about a little bit more when I got into photography. So let's jump in. Quick little update. When I came home, I haven't taken a single shot on it yet, but I have picked up the RF 50mm 1.4. So really excited to test this out over the next few weeks and compare it to my trusty f1.2, which, if you know my channel, I use a lot of, and I use a lot in this video as well. So I should start by saying Vietnam was absolutely beautiful. Definitely a favorite of mine, just the colors, the people, the atmosphere throughout the country. It really was special, and it's definitely somewhere I really want to return to whenever possible, and somewhere I can definitely recommend traveling, especially for the type of photography I like to capture, this mix of kind of travel and street photography. So this first lesson for me on light might sound like a pretty obvious one, but I think many of us pick up photography and actually take quite a while to fully understand light, myself included. So for a while, I really didn't fully grasp how light will actually change everything in your photos, the contrast, the way colors look, and most importantly here, what I want to touch on, the way light really creates depth in your images as well. But how does it do this? A simple exercise here is to pick a few of your favorite images, either of your own or even other photographers, and just study them. By looking at them, you should be able to work out, or at least make a good guess based off the shadows, which direction the light is coming from. By doing this simple exercise, I notice that most of the images that I take are more either side lit or even backlit. When I'm here taking the photo, the sun usually sits somewhere in front of me or off to the side, often up in those top corners just outside the frame or off to the side just outside the frame. And there's an obvious reason this happens so much in my photography. It's the same reason this light in my room here isn't sitting directly in front of me, which would make this whole scene look totally flat without any shadows. That's why it's slightly off to the side, about as much as I can move it to the side in this room. This is what helps create more depth in your images, which is much more compelling to look at and much more flattering on your subjects as well. Of course, this really varies on the type of photography you're doing, but for my style, I like to follow this pretty simple rule for most of my photos. If you want to experiment with this, it's pretty simple. You can practice with an artificial light, moving it around your subject in every direction, or even lighting a scene for video was one thing that really helped me learn these basics quite well. Naturally, we can't always follow this, but there's certainly other ways we can create a bit more depth in our compositions as well. A few tricks or tools I like to pull out when the light isn't exactly how I'd like it to be, which can also add depth. The obvious one is our framing. By shooting through different objects, this can really help add depth as well. Also, different types of leading lines can be really useful for this, drawing you more into the image. Another thing I like to do when the light isn't very appealing to shoot in is actually use it a bit like a training session to practice different skills. One I did on this trip, which might be my next video, was just spending a day shooting with slower shutter speeds. So in slightly less exciting conditions, this can be a great time to experiment and practice things like this. Another thing I encountered on this trip, partly because it was quite rushed, was really trying to make the most out of the good conditions when they do appear. So that doesn't always mean to go out just shooting when conditions are perfect, but when the conditions are good, really plan around that. And this can stop me from burning out as well. I think if you're struggling a little bit, hitting a wall, or just feeling flat with your photography, going out in good conditions can be exactly what you might need. This happens to all of us, and it happened to me in Vietnam. I spent an entire morning shooting in some pretty flat light. Also the location, I just wasn't finding any great compositions, but I stuck at it, and I really didn't have anything to show for it. So I felt over it. I felt like I was burning out and no real photos to show for it. So I needed to reset. The next day, I didn't force it. I actually only went out when the sun decided to show. And surprise, surprise, I took many photos I liked in a much shorter space of time. So these are the type of conditions I really love most. Of course, we all vary. Many photographers chase sunrise, sunset, or that golden hour time. And I actually prefer the few hours just after golden hour in the morning or just before golden hour in the afternoon. Don't get me wrong, I still really like golden hour, that soft, warm light. It's beautiful, but the light really is the hero often, almost more than the subjects themselves a lot of the time. So overall, I actually prefer when the sun is slightly higher. I love how this really brightens up natural colors and also creates this side light that I spoke more on earlier. So for me, basically, as the sun gets higher, but not too high, once it's directly above you, it becomes a bit like that direct front-on lighting for a subject. Everything just looks really flat. Naturally, some places around the world, especially in winter, the sun rarely even gets this high, so I find myself shooting throughout the harshest light of the day. The reason I target mornings, well, that's simple. I just love watching the world wake up, especially in more touristy places like big cities. This always feels like a real authentic time of day to capture moments as well before the city gets too crowded with people. There's always something special about these mornings for me, especially in these new places, so it's my favorite time to really explore and see a city, but to take photos as well. Again, this isn't the only time of day I shoot, but I definitely spend a lot of time here. So I hope this was an interesting one. I should have that slow shutter vid up next, then maybe a look at this new lens here. Keep on creating and keep on going, my friends. Catch you in the next one. Bye for now.